This projection could bankrupt the company, Henry Caldwell said, his voice echoing off the marble walls of the boardroom, sharp and commanding, every head turning instinctively toward the tall man with the gray suit perfectly pressed, cufflinks glinting under the overhead lights, and a silence settling like a heavy velvet curtain over the room. Monica Brooks, seated at the polished walnut table, paused mid-sentence, her dark eyes catching the reflection of the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, her posture unyielding, the subtle hum of the air conditioning mingling with the faint rustle of papers as the assistants froze, their pens hovering above notepads. She was 34, self-made, having clawed her way from a cramped apartment in Southside Chicago to the helm of an emerging tech company now listed on the NYSE, and in that moment, every microsecond of her calculated confidence radiated through the room. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the financial projections binder, the leather cover smooth beneath her fingers, and yet the grip was firm enough to convey authority. "Henry," she began, her voice calm but precise, each syllable deliberate. "The projected ROI on this section is misstated, and if we proceed without adjustment, it exposes the company to potential regulatory scrutiny." The words fell with a weight that made the room collectively exhale, subtle but unmistakable, as if the air itself had thickened around the high-backed leather chairs and the chrome of the laptops glowing in the dimmed sunlight. Henry's smile faltered for the briefest moment, a flicker of uncertainty passing through the usually unshakable demeanor, and Monica noted it without a twitch, her gaze steady, unwavering, sweeping across the faces of the executives seated around the table, their eyes wide with disbelief and curiosity. She had anticipated their reaction. She had anticipated the disbelief, the silent questioning glances, the brief rush of adrenaline that comes when someone's authority is questioned in such a public and unexpected way. Monica inhaled slowly, feeling the subtle vibration of the polished floor beneath her heels, the hum of the projectors, the distant city noise filtering faintly through the tinted windows, and then exhaled, letting the weight of her words settle naturally into the stillness. The assumptions used for these projections do not align with the latest market data from Q2, and continuing without revision could mislead investors and affect shareholder confidence. She continued, her tone measured, each word articulated with precision honed from years of presenting in front of skeptical boards and cautious analysts, her confidence absolute, yet never arrogant, commanding attention without demanding it. The room remained silent, the kind of silence that speaks volumes, where every executive around the table feels the pressure of scrutiny and the sudden recognition that authority is being challenged not by a junior analyst or a consultant, but by the very CEO entrusted with guiding the company's trajectory. Monica's eyes flicked to the large screen displaying the projections, her fingers subtly tracing the column of numbers with a light tap, as if to punctuate the imperfection she had identified, while Henry's hand, still holding the pen midair, betrayed a minuscule shake, unnoticed by most but observed by Monica, a silent acknowledgement that he had been caught off guard. The sunlight shifted imperceptibly, casting angular patterns across the table, reflecting off polished pens and tablet screens, creating a cinematic interplay of light and shadow that seemed almost orchestrated to highlight the tension and the precise moment of confrontation. And in that exact instant, every assistant, every junior analyst, every board member felt the shift, the sudden, almost imperceptible tipping of power, not by volume or anger, but by knowledge and clarity, by the calm and absolute authority of a leader who had the courage to speak truth to power. And the room was frozen, suspended between disbelief and respect, the hum of the air conditioning and the soft tapping of a distant clock filling the emptiness as Monica Brooks, Black CEO, remained seated upright, unflinching, radiating a quiet but undeniable dominance that commanded acknowledgement without confrontation. Monica Brooks sat back in her chair for a moment, letting the weight of the boardroom settle around her, the subtle glow of the afternoon sun illuminating the edges of her blazer, casting long shadows across the gleaming surface of the table, her mind running through the figures and projections she had studied for the past 2 weeks, each number cross-referenced against market trends, investor reports, and the internal audit she had personally overseen, her hands folded lightly in front of her. As she allowed herself a brief pause, breathing in the faint scent of polished wood and the subtle tang of coffee that lingered in the air, the hum of the ventilation system creating a soft, continuous backdrop to the quiet shifting of chairs and the soft scrape of pens against paper from the junior analysts who still seemed hesitant to draw breath. As if acknowledging her presence in that moment required a careful balance of respect and caution, she reflected on the journey that had led her here, from late nights in a shared apartment with peeling paint and the constant buzz of city traffic filtering through thin windows, to long hours at the public library poring over finance, journals, and case studies, her determination sharpened by every setback and every moment she had been underestimated because of her age, gender, or the color of her skin. And now here she was, in a boardroom filled with seasoned executives, each one accustomed to asserting authority and navigating corporate hierarchies with confidence. Yet all of them momentarily stilled by the clarity and calm precision of her insight. She glanced across the table at Richard Caldwell, his brow furrowed, the corners of his mouth tightening as he processed the point she had raised, his posture rigid, an almost imperceptible shift in his demeanor betraying the surprise he could not openly admit. And she noted the subtle cues, the tightening of his jaw, the slight backward tilt in his chair, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the pen he had been holding, as if measuring the next words to speak. The room held its collective breath, each person acutely aware of the tension, the delicate interplay of authority and correctness, and Monica remained composed, her thoughts focused on ensuring that every statement she made was supported by concrete data and logical reasoning. Her voice had carried authority in the initial clarification, but now she allowed the quiet confidence of her presence to convey the weight of her expertise without uttering another word, the light shifting gradually as the sun edged toward the horizon, highlighting the textures of the carpet and the reflective surfaces of the laptops and glassware, casting the room in an amber glow that seemed to heighten the sense of anticipation and suspended time. She could feel the eyes of her fellow executives, some curious, some skeptical, some clearly impressed, tracking every movement, gauging every reaction. And she knew that the subtle power of observation and restraint often spoke louder than any raised voice. Monica allowed herself a faint smile, acknowledging the silent recognition of her peers, her mind already preparing for the follow-up discussion and the necessary adjustments to the projections, the flow of information, the potential ripple effects on investor confidence, and the next steps for strategic planning, all while maintaining the outward calm that had become her signature, the soft tick of a distant wall clock marking the passage of seconds that felt both elongated and charged, the slight movement of a leather-bound notebook being shifted by an assistant, the low murmur of an executive quietly confirming data on a tablet, and the subtle rustle of documents being repositioned across the table, each sound punctuating the atmosphere with the quiet intensity of professional focus and unspoken acknowledgement. Monica felt the familiar surge of control that came from competence paired with patience, from having prepared thoroughly and executed with precision, and she allowed that confidence to settle into her posture, the gentle rise and fall of her chest a rhythmic counterpoint to the silent tempo of the room, knowing that in moments like this, leadership was less about commanding attention through volume or aggression and more about demonstrating unshakable clarity, the ability to anticipate challenges, and the readiness to respond with insight and composure. And as the sunlight shifted, yet again, reflecting in the polished surfaces and casting elongated shadows that danced subtly across the floor, Monica kept her gaze steady, her presence calm yet assertive, embodying the balance of authority and understanding that had carried her from an ambitious newcomer in the corporate world to the confident leader now quietly guiding the room with every subtle gesture and measured breath. Henry Caldwell shifted slightly in his chair, his fingers drumming softly against the polished surface of the table as he attempted to mask the surprise that had crossed his features, the sunlight catching the subtle gray strands of his hair and casting faint shadows on his face. Monica Brooks watched silently, her posture poised, one hand lightly resting on the leather binder while her other hand subtly traced the edge of her notepad. The room filled with the quiet rhythm of attention, every executive holding their breath as the tension hovered in the space between them, the subtle click of a pen lid being closed in the corner, the faint shuffle of papers, the soft sigh of a junior analyst adjusting their seat, all punctuating the weight of the moment. Monica's eyes flicked over the financial tables projected on the screen, absorbing the numbers and the slight variances she had already identified in her review, mentally noting the small adjustments required. Her lips pressed together in thought as she considered the implications for investor confidence, corporate compliance, and the broader strategic trajectory of the company. The hum of the overhead lights mingling with the distant city sounds filtering faintly through the tinted glass windows, the muffled honk of traffic and occasional passing siren blending into the ambient white noise that underscored the boardroom's silent tension. She allowed her gaze to sweep across the room, noting subtle reactions, the furrowed brows of the accounting lead, the slightly widened eyes of the chief operations officer, the tentative posture of the legal counsel as they registered the correction. The almost imperceptible shift in Henry's body language, a tilt of the head, a deepening crease along his forehead, the small flare of nostrils that betrayed an internal recalibration, all observed and cataloged in Monica's mind with the precision she had honed over years of navigating high-stakes corporate environments where every glance and gesture could signal alignment or dissent. She remained seated, allowing the room to settle into her rhythm, her calm creating a gravitational pull that demanded acknowledgement without raising her voice. The subtle play of light from the late afternoon sun reflecting off the polished wood and chrome surfaces casting angular patterns across the table that seemed to emphasize the clarity of her presence. She allowed herself the briefest of smiles as she noted the unspoken recognition in the eyes of several board members who had previously underestimated her due to her youth, her gender, or the color of her skin, the careful balance of confidence and humility radiating in her demeanor. Monica's mind moved ahead, considering the next steps in the discussion, the potential questions from investors that might arise during the quarterly briefing, the adjustments that would need to be communicated to stakeholders, all while maintaining the outward composure that had become her signature, a quiet authority that spoke volumes in the absence of raised voices, the faint rustle of a report being repositioned, the soft tap of a tablet screen as someone double-checked a calculation, and the almost imperceptible exhale of another executive registering the shift in dynamics. Monica's hands remained lightly resting on the binder, fingertips grazing the smooth leather, the weight of her presence creating a subtle tension in the room that allowed every attentive professional to consider the implications of her insight and the meticulous accuracy with which she had articulated it. She felt the familiar steadiness of control that came from being fully prepared, from knowing the details down to the last decimal, from understanding both the macro trends and micro variables that would influence investor confidence and company performance. And as the sun shifted slightly, the golden light casting a warm hue across the room and reflecting in the polished surfaces of laptops and glasses, Monica allowed the silence to do the work, her calm and deliberate presence reshaping the boardroom dynamic. Henry Caldwell finally exhaled softly, a gesture almost imperceptible, yet it carried the weight of concession, a subtle acknowledgement that the correction had been not only valid but necessary. The room remained quiet, every eye still fixed on Monica, the subtle acknowledgement of her authority and competence resonating through the space, the ambient sounds of the city below providing a steady undertone, a reminder that the decisions made in this room would ripple far beyond its walls. And Monica, poised and unflinching, maintained her quiet control, allowing the focus to remain on clarity, truth, and the measured execution of her leadership. Monica Brooks allowed herself a slow exhale, the subtle rhythm of her breathing matching the almost imperceptible tapping of fingers on the polished table surface, her dark eyes scanning the room once more as she considered the delicate balance between authority and diplomacy, the late afternoon sun now casting a warm amber glow across the boardroom, highlighting the subtle sheen of the polished walnut and chrome accents, and catching the glint of cufflinks, pins, and the edges of tablets as the executives absorbed the implications of her correction. She leaned slightly forward, resting her forearms lightly on the table, her posture confident yet approachable, signaling to the room that while she had identified the misstatement and clarified the projections, she was prepared to guide the discussion toward constructive solutions. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. A gentle stillness settled across the high-backed chairs, the the soft rustle of papers, the faint hum of air conditioning, and the muted clicks of tablet screens creating a backdrop that emphasized the clarity and weight of her presence. Monica's thoughts were focused, tracing through the chain reaction her observations might trigger, considering the questions investors could raise, the dialogue with regulatory advisors that would follow, the adjustments necessary to maintain market confidence, and the communication strategy to ensure transparency without causing undue alarm. And yet outwardly, she projected nothing but calm certainty, a quiet command of space that allowed others to respond thoughtfully rather than react hastily. Her gaze moved to Henry Caldwell. Noting the subtle furrow of his brow, the tightening of his jaw, the almost imperceptible shift of his shoulders, each micro-expression conveying the internal acknowledgement of her authority. While several board members exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of relief, surprise, and growing respect, Monica allowed the moment to unfold naturally. Knowing that effective leadership often relied on patience and measured timing rather than overt insistence, she leaned back slightly. Observing the soft play of sunlight through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the angled light casting gentle geometric patterns on the tabletop, reflecting subtly in the glossy screens of laptops and tablets, the shadows stretching and shifting as the sun continued its slow descent, adding a dynamic visual cadence to the otherwise silent room. Monica's attention briefly shifted to the assistant at the far end, noting the precise organization of notes and the subtle adjustments being made to documentation in response to her clarification, every action reinforcing the perception of order and deliberate thought. Her mind simultaneously moved ahead, reviewing follow-up items, next quarter projections, potential board inquiries, and strategic recommendations, while outwardly, her presence remained composed, her posture poised, hands lightly resting on the binder, fingers grazing the smooth leather, a reminder of both her preparation and her control. The room, still suspended in quiet contemplation, reflected the shift of energy, the subtle rebalancing of hierarchy where knowledge and clarity had taken precedence over assumption and authority. And Monica felt the familiar steadying effect that came from being fully prepared, confident in her insight, and able to guide not through volume or insistence, but through precise articulation and unwavering calm. The faint city sounds beyond the tinted windows, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional siren, the murmur of life in the streets far below, provided a soft underscore to the concentrated focus inside. The gentle ambient sounds contrasting with the intense attention and awareness held by every person in the room. And as the minutes passed, the tension softened into a collective acknowledgement, a recognition that the direction and decisions being set forth were grounded in truth and expertise. Monica maintained her quiet authority, allowing the board to adjust to the moment, to internalize the correction, and to prepare for the next steps with renewed confidence. Her calm and deliberate composure ensuring that every action taken in response would be measured, informed, and aligned with the company's best interests. The sunlight continued to shift, casting a subtle golden hue across the room, illuminating the thoughtful expressions of each executive, highlighting the polished surfaces, and reinforcing the atmosphere of attentive focus and silent respect. Monica Brooks remained the central pivot of this dynamic, her presence both guiding and steadying the room, a testament to the power of insight delivered with clarity and the quiet confidence that comes from experience, preparation, and unwavering dedication to accuracy and integrity. The atmosphere in the boardroom remained taut. Each individual seated around the long table caught between the weight of Monica Brooks's insight and the unspoken challenge of acknowledging the correction, the soft glint of sunlight reflecting across polished chrome and glass surfaces creating intricate patterns that danced across the attentive faces of the executives. Henry Caldwell shifted in his chair once again, his brow furrowing more deeply, a faint tightening around his eyes betraying the discomfort he felt at being publicly outpaced in a realm he had always assumed was firmly his domain. Monica observed him without a flicker of emotion, her dark eyes steady and clear, absorbing the subtle micro-expressions, the hesitant movements, the slight lean forward or backward, the barely perceptible adjustments in posture that indicated internal recalibration. She remained poised, her hands lightly resting atop the binder, fingers brushing the smooth leather as if it were a tactile anchor, and yet every motion was deliberate, a demonstration of quiet confidence and absolute command of the situation. Her mind calculated the potential ripple effects of her clarification, the chain reactions that might unfold in investor relations, regulatory feedback, and the board's strategic decisions, all while maintaining a demeanor that invited neither confrontation nor challenge. The room collectively exhaled in muted unison, though no sound passed their lips, the collective acknowledgement of her authority manifesting in the stillness, the careful attention, the barely audible rustle of documents being shifted, the soft tapping of a tablet screen, the subtle repositioning of pens and notepads, and the gentle shuffle of a chair as a board member adjusted to absorb the weight of the moment. Monica allowed the silence to work in her favor, knowing that the impact of measured calm and precise reasoning often carried farther than a raised voice. She traced the key figures on the projection once more, highlighting discrepancies and emphasizing adjustments with subtle gestures, the ambient light from the windows catching the edge of her sleeves and casting thin lines of shadow across the table that accentuated the deliberate pacing of her movements. Henry's hand rested lightly on his notebook, the pen hovering midair, as if the simple act of writing could restore a sense of control. Yet the confidence and precision with which Monica had articulated the correction had already shifted the dynamics. Each board member, now aware that the authority they had presumed rested solely with the investors, was, in fact, grounded in the meticulous analysis and strategic clarity of the CEO herself. Monica's thoughts briefly traveled to the late nights spent preparing for this meeting, reviewing market data, reconciling internal audits, and anticipating questions that might be raised, all of which had culminated in this precise moment of silent influence. Her focus never wavered, her gaze scanning the room, registering the subtle nods of understanding, the raised eyebrows of surprise, the slight lean toward attentiveness, and the quiet acknowledgement that every action she had taken had shifted the room toward reasoned consideration rather than assumption or ego. The faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant city sounds filtering through the tinted windows provided a continuous ambient backdrop, yet the tension within the room held its own rhythm, a cadence that Monica mastered effortlessly through her presence alone. She remained seated, poised, hands gently resting on the binder, her dark eyes steady, noting every subtle reaction, every unspoken assessment, and allowing the executives to internalize the implications of the correction without the need for further commentary. The sunlight continued to shift, accentuating the polished surfaces and casting a warm glow across the room, reflecting off pens, tablets, and the edges of the screens, creating a dynamic interplay of light and shadow that mirrored the subtle shifts in authority. Monica felt the familiar satisfaction of exercising leadership through precision and calm, knowing that the acknowledgement of her insight was being processed and that the board would act with consideration and respect. And as the minutes passed, the tension softened into a measured recognition of her capability. Her quiet authority setting the tone for the discussion to follow. The room settled into an attentive focus, every action deliberate, every movement weighted with thought, and Monica Brooks, composed, assured, and fully present, remained the central pivot around which the board's understanding and appreciation now revolved, guiding the room without a word, commanding respect with calm and deliberate control. Monica Brooks remained still for a few moments longer, allowing the ambient silence of the boardroom to settle around her like a soft, unseen curtain. The warm light of the late afternoon sun cascading through the tall windows and painting long, golden streaks across the polished wood and glass surfaces, each reflection catching the eyes of the executives in subtle, shifting patterns. Her dark eyes softening slightly as she observed the quiet absorption of her correction, the faint hum of the air conditioning blending with the distant sounds of the city below, the occasional honk of a horn or muted siren creating a subdued, rhythmic backdrop to the concentrated focus inside. She leaned back in her chair, the smooth leather creaking softly beneath her weight, fingers lightly drumming against the edge of the binder in a deliberate, thoughtful rhythm, her mind tracing the sequence of events that had brought the room to this suspended state of awareness, the careful orchestration of analysis, preparation, and articulation now converging in the shared understanding of those present. She allowed a slow, even breath to pass through her, feeling the subtle vibration of the polished floor beneath her heels, the slight movement of the blinds as a breeze passed through the ventilation system, and the soft shuffle of papers and pens as the assistants and junior analysts subtly adjusted to the stillness, the tension and anticipation lingering like a fine mist over the room, each executive registering in their own way the magnitude of the correction, the quiet authority of her presence, and the unspoken realization that the clarity and precision she had demonstrated carried the full weight of responsibility and expertise. Monica's gaze briefly moved across the room, noting the subtle gestures of acknowledgement, the slight nods, the attentive posture shifts, the faint, almost imperceptible widening of eyes that indicated comprehension and respect, all of which reinforced the quiet gravity of the moment without a single word needing to be spoken. The soft golden light continued to move across the surfaces, accentuating the polished edges of the table, the reflective sheen of tablets and laptops, the subtle glint of pens, and the chrome of chair frames, creating a visual rhythm that mirrored the internal processing occurring in the minds of the executives. Monica allowed herself a small, imperceptible smile as she recognized the collective recalibration of perception in the room, the unspoken acknowledgement that her insight and composure had shifted the dynamic subtly yet irrevocably, the gentle shift of her hands over the binder and the light tilt of her head reinforcing her poised presence, every micro-movement deliberate, every glance purposeful, the quiet cadence of her actions allowing the board to settle into attentive consideration, the gentle hum of the city outside the tinted windows providing a continuous, grounding undertone to the room's focused energy. Monica felt the familiar steadiness of control that came from preparation, knowledge, and the unwavering confidence of experience, the kind of authority that does not need to be asserted loudly, but is recognized and absorbed through presence, timing, and precise articulation. The light continued its slow migration across the room, catching faces, surfaces, and the polished edges of binders in shifting patterns that lent a cinematic quality to the space. Monica's focus remained absolute, tracking subtle reactions, noting small shifts in posture, brief movements of hands or pens, the nearly silent exhale of those around her as they adjusted to the implications of her correction, the room breathing in silent synchrony with her own measured cadence. She felt the moment stretching, elongated yet perfectly contained, each executive aware of the weight of observation, the necessity of thoughtful response, and the quiet power of prepared, confident, and deliberate insight. And in this stillness, the quiet authority of Monica Brooks dominated the space, her calm, poised presence guiding the room, her insight now fully absorbed, the anticipation and tension replaced with focused reflection, every movement, breath, and subtle gesture reinforcing the acknowledgement of her competence and the respect she had earned through clarity, preparation, and unwavering professionalism. Henry Caldwell's gaze lingered on the projections, his eyes scanning the figures again, and this time there was no defensiveness, only a quiet recognition that the insight Monica Brooks had provided was not only accurate but critical, the room holding a collective exhale, subtle but palpable. As the realization sank in, Monica observed the micro-expressions with careful precision. The almost imperceptible shift of shoulders, the tightening of jaws, the slow nods exchanged between executives, all small indicators that the authority had subtly realigned. She remained seated, hands lightly resting on the binder, fingertips brushing the smooth leather, the sunlight now slanting at a softer angle, illuminating the room with a warm, golden hue that softened edges and highlighted the attentiveness of every individual present. The ambient hum of the city below providing a gentle underscore, blending with the low murmur of tablets and laptops as minor adjustments were noted. Monica allowed the silence to deepen, understanding that the impact of her correction would resonate far more strongly when absorbed without interruption. Her dark eyes scanned each face again, noting the flicker of acknowledgement, the quick glance toward colleagues, the quiet exhalations, all indicating the shift from skepticism to respect, the weight of experience and preparation radiating from her presence without the need for further articulation. And in that stillness, the room seemed to breathe in unison, the tension relaxing into contemplation. Henry finally leaned back slightly, a small but telling nod, a gesture that spoke volumes in the language of corporate hierarchy. Monica recognized it instantly, the subtle power of correctness and calm authority prevailing over assumed dominance. She allowed a slight tilt of her head, a measured shift of her hands, reinforcing her presence without words, her mind cataloging every subtle response, projecting how this acknowledgement would influence decisions in the upcoming board votes, investor discussions, and strategic planning sessions. The interplay of light and shadow across the table and devices catching her attention momentarily, highlighting the reflective surfaces and the focused eyes of the executives, and she noted how each shift in light seemed to mirror the shifting dynamics in the room, the silent respect, the recalibration of assumptions, the quiet acknowledgement of skill and insight that had long been underestimated. Monica kept her posture relaxed yet upright, radiating competence, patience, and composure, her presence guiding the attention and focus of the room without needing to dominate the conversation verbally. The subtle sounds of papers being adjusted, screens being scrolled, and pens being repositioned punctuating the calm tension, each movement reinforcing the awareness of her authority and the correctness of her analysis. She allowed herself a mental smile, recognizing that the balance of preparation, clarity, and steady confidence had created this moment. The executives now aligned, not because of position or title, but because of the undeniable clarity of her reasoning. The room, bathed in warm sunlight and quiet focus, had shifted subtly yet decisively, Monica's insight and composure having quietly established a new equilibrium. A measured authority that would influence the discussions to follow, her steady gaze and poised demeanor anchoring the attention and respect of all present. The hum of the city outside now a soft, persistent undertone, the air in the boardroom almost tangible with anticipation, reflection, and recalibration. Monica Brooks remained the unspoken pivot of the room, guiding it with precision and calm. Every eye acknowledging the quiet power and clarity of her leadership, the subtle nods, attentive glances, and careful posture adjustments speaking volumes without a single word. And the late afternoon sun continued to stream through the windows, casting long, elegant patterns across the table and floor, a visual echo of the quiet yet absolute impact of her insight. The room settled into a thoughtful stillness, every executive absorbing the implications, and Monica, poised and assured, maintained the subtle dominance of prepared expertise, clarity, and unwavering composure, her presence commanding attention, respect, and measured acknowledgement. Monica Brooks allowed herself a slow, deliberate smile as the subtle acknowledgement of her authority radiated through the boardroom. Each executive now fully aware that the insight and precision she had demonstrated were not only correct but essential to the company's continued success. The warm late afternoon sunlight filtering through the tall windows bathed the room in a soft golden glow, illuminating the polished surfaces of the table, laptops, and chrome accents, casting long, gentle shadows that seemed to echo the gravity of the moment. She leaned slightly forward, her hands resting lightly on the binder, the leather cool and smooth beneath her fingers, her posture relaxed yet commanding. Exuding calm confidence and measured authority, she observed Henry Caldwell as he slowly exhaled, the tension easing from his shoulders, his eyes reflecting a newfound respect and a silent acknowledgement of the meticulous preparation and clarity that had guided her throughout the discussion. Monica allowed the pause to linger, understanding that the power of patience, composure, and precision often resonated more profoundly than words or overt assertion. The faint hum of the air conditioning, the soft rustle of papers, and the occasional click of a pen provided a subtle rhythmic backdrop to the stillness in the room, each sound reinforcing the atmosphere of quiet reflection and attentive focus. Her gaze traveled across the table, noting the small gestures of recognition from the board members, the slight nods, the attentive glances, the faint but telling expressions of contemplation and agreement, all silent indicators that the correction had shifted both perception and understanding. Monica's mind traced the next steps in strategy, anticipating the follow-up discussions, the refinement of projections, and the communications that would flow to investors, while outwardly maintaining the serene and controlled presence that had defined her leadership. The sunlight continued its slow descent, creating a dynamic interplay of light and shadow that accentuated the contours of the room and the focused expressions of the executives. Monica allowed a soft exhale, the quiet rhythm of her breathing blending seamlessly with the ambient sounds, reinforcing the calm authority that had come to dominate the space. She reflected briefly on the journey that had brought her here. From late nights in a modest apartment studying market trends, to painstakingly cross-referencing data and anticipating questions, each step a preparation for moments exactly like this. The subtle shifts in body language, the slight adjustments in posture, and the careful attention to her words, all contributing to the recognition that had now settled over the room. Monica's gaze softened slightly as she noted the relief and understanding that replaced skepticism and doubt. The executives now fully aligned in thought. The weight of the earlier tension transformed into a quiet respect, the gentle hum of the city outside providing a soft, grounding undertone, the distant sounds of traffic, occasional sirens, and muted street noise blending into a subtle auditory backdrop that contrasted with the concentrated focus and deliberate stillness of the boardroom. Monica's hands shifted slightly over the binder, her fingertips grazing the leather in a subtle, rhythmic motion, reinforcing the calm and deliberate presence she maintained. The room absorbing the impact of her measured composure, the acknowledgement of skill, and the quiet demonstration of authority. She allowed a brief pause, letting the executives reflect fully on the correction and the integrity behind it. The sunlight now casting long, elongated patterns across the table and floor, highlighting the attentive faces and subtle gestures of recognition. Monica remained seated, poised and assured, the silent pivot of influence in the room. Her presence guiding the flow of thought and the recalibration of authority, every subtle movement, breath, and shift reinforcing the impact of knowledge, preparation, and unwavering composure. And as the late afternoon light continued to drift across the polished surfaces, the boardroom remained quiet. The executives absorbed in contemplation and reflection. Monica Brooks maintained her calm, deliberate authority, her insight having reshaped the dynamics of the room with quiet precision, integrity, and measured confidence, establishing a new equilibrium of respect and understanding that would guide all subsequent decisions. The boardroom had settled into a rare, reflective silence, the late afternoon sunlight now spilling in soft, golden streams across the polished table, illuminating the faces of the executives with a gentle warmth. Monica Brooks remained poised at the center of it all, her dark eyes scanning the room one last time, noting the subtle nods, the brief glances of respect, and the quiet smiles that betrayed their appreciation for the clarity and integrity she had demonstrated, her hands resting lightly on the binder, the smooth leather grounding her presence, the soft hum of the air conditioning blending seamlessly with the distant city sounds drifting in through the windows, the occasional honk of a horn or muted siren a distant undertone to the contemplative energy within the room. She allowed herself a measured breath, feeling the satisfaction of having guided the discussion to a place of understanding and equilibrium. The room itself seemed to exhale, the tension that had hung in the air moments before dissolving into focused reflection and quiet acknowledgement. Henry Caldwell leaned back in his chair, his posture softened, a subtle shift that indicated both concession and respect, and Monica noted the small, almost imperceptible changes in demeanor across the room, the straightening of shoulders, the thoughtful tilts of heads, the steadying of hands on pens and tablets, all small indicators that the correction had resonated deeply and had recalibrated the collective perception of authority. She let her gaze sweep slowly across the faces, absorbing the silent acknowledgments and the muted expressions of understanding, each one a testament to the effectiveness of measured insight delivered with calm confidence. The sunlight continued to shift, creating dynamic patterns of light and shadow across the room that mirrored the internal realignment of attention and respect. Monica allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile, appreciating the moment of quiet triumph that required no fanfare, no verbal assertion, only the recognition of careful preparation, integrity, and calm presence. The subtle rustle of papers, the soft tap of a pen, and the gentle adjustments of seating punctuated the room like a delicate, unobtrusive rhythm. every sound reinforcing the composed atmosphere and the shared understanding that the discussion had reached a point of clarity and consensus. Monica reflected briefly on the journey that had led her here. The late nights poring over data, the meticulous preparation, the countless moments of self-discipline and focus that had shaped her approach to leadership and decision-making. And she allowed herself a moment of internal satisfaction, knowing that her commitment to accuracy, thoughtful communication, and ethical conduct had guided the board to a place of awareness and recalibration. The executives remained attentive, their expressions a mixture of contemplation, respect, and a quiet sense of realignment. The hum of the city providing a subtle backdrop that contrasted with the intense focus and presence within the room. Monica's posture remained relaxed yet commanding, the gentle positioning of her hands on the binder and the deliberate steadiness of her gaze conveying authority without dominance. The sunlight shifting across polished surfaces highlighted the reflective elements of the room, the glint of chrome, the sheen of tablets and screens, the subtle movement of shadows, all adding to the cinematic sense of stillness and gravity, each executive absorbing the lesson imparted by clarity and insight. Monica maintaining her calm, deliberate presence, allowing the room to fully process and internalize the shift in understanding. The gentle play of light emphasizing the quiet power of her leadership. The boardroom settled into a final, contemplative calm, a unified acknowledgement of correctness and integrity. And Monica Brooks remained at the center, poised, assured, and fully present, her presence an anchor of composure and respect, the sunlight now softening into a late glow. The reflective surfaces and attentive faces creating a tableau of silent appreciation. And in this stillness, the equilibrium she had established held firm, a subtle, unspoken testament to the strength of preparation, clarity, and unwavering ethical leadership. The room breathing together in quiet recognition, every subtle movement, breath, and glance reinforcing the impact of her insight and the lasting influence of measured authority.